Welcome back to the Business of Defense, sponsored by ASMC on Federal News Network. I'm talking with Che Bolden, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Charles F. Bolden Group, a privately held company with a team of specialists and advisors in space and national security, science, technology, engineering, math, plus arts and design education, health initiatives, and mergers and acquisitions. Che, I want to talk a little bit about your path, your personal path to the Bolden Group, and I think it's important now for all of our viewers and listeners to know we have a personal relationship that goes back a few years, a few decades.
Just a little.
We started out our careers in the Marine Corps as second lieutenants at the basic school, same platoon, right across the hall from each other. We both kind of went different paths, but came back together in about the 2016 time frame at Marine Corps Installations Command, and then departed again, but came back, found each other together at the transition courses we were getting ready to retire. Can you talk a little bit about your path again through the Marine Corps and ending up at the Bolden Group and doing what you're doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, a lot of kids, young women and young men, have these role models in their life that influence where they go, or at least the fortunate ones do. There are those who don't, and hopefully we can find ways to give them role models. But in my case, I never lacked for role models. Both my mother and my father were always my role models. My father in particular, by virtue of his line of work, he was also a Marine. The people that he surrounded himself with just oozed excellence. You go and you don't have to know who they are or what they do. You just know that there's somebody that's confident and is there to do things. And so as I was growing up, I had a very privileged life to be able to be around those types of individuals. And so every example that I saw that I looked up to and thought was aspirational for myself, and due to timing, it was always men. That's changing, thankfully. But at the time, these men were just really, really impressive. And I knew I wanted to be like them. I didn't know exactly how I was going to be like them, but I was like, you know what? That's it, and I want to do it. And so from a very early age, I knew I was going to be a fighter pilot, or I knew I was going to be a Marine. I didn't know how I was going to get there. For a while, I thought I was going to be an architect and take a little sidebar. But when all was said and done, things just kind of naturally progressed to lead me down the path that I took. I went to the United States Naval Academy right out of high school. For those who are listening with children, I highly recommend the prep school is a really, really good option. It's hard to jump from high school to the Naval Academy without creating a lot of angst and distress. But I did it. I finished in the top 98% of my class. I stole that from John McCain. So I had my struggles there, but nonetheless, it never deterred me or caused any reason for me to doubt that the path I had chosen was the right one. Again, when it came time to decide what profession I was going to go into, the Marine Corps seemed like a very easy and natural fit because all of the examples I had growing up happened to have been, really high-performing Marines, and so that was a no-brainer for me as well. Once I got into the Marine Corps, when we met, I actually was content to be a Marine, period. Didn't matter what I was going to do. In fact, I thought I might become a combat engineer or something. Had it not been for the guidance and the mentorship of Captain Ed McGee, who was one of our SPCs, who convinced me that Marine Corps aviation needed to have a little bit more diversity and it needed to have the talent that a diverse workforce could bring, highly encouraged me to go aviation. I didn't think I was qualified, but lo and behold, I went and took the tests and I was, and that's how I got into the aviation world with his strong mentorship very, very early on. And then once that happened, there was kind of a natural progression of things. The military occupational specialty I ended up going into, flying F-18s, particularly I was the weapons and sensors officer sitting in the back seat. For those who are Pulp Fiction fans, that would be Goose in the modern era. I chose that path and it proved to be professionally lucrative because I got exposed to a lot of high pressure lessons and learned how to deal with adversity in some respects from that. I did deviate throughout my career. A lot of times Marines will talk about the Marine Corps as a force as a jack of all trades, master of none. Well, I embodied that. I did a lot of different things in the Marine Corps, from crewed aviation to uncrewed aviation to international affairs and into critical infrastructure, where we ended up. One thread throughout all of that, two threads actually throughout all of that, were leadership and then technology, believe it or not. The Marine Corps is not known as a technologically advanced force, but where we were at our tail end, we were trying very, very hard to embrace technology to improve the state of infrastructure, and I got bit by that bug. And so when the time finally came for me to retire and decide on what I was going to do next, I knew those were the two areas that I was probably going to go into. Whether it was going to be leadership first and foremost or technology first and foremost, I didn't really care. I actually was kind of more of a bull in a china shop, and I ran out and tried to do both. I don't advise that to anybody who's trying to start a business. But here I am now, where I think I've found a pretty decent mix between the two, where I can have my cake and eat it too. We are a leadership organization, but because we're focusing those four main areas on one particular area with some commonality, and that's space and the space economy, I'm able to merge those two passions together. I hope that at some point becomes seamless to people, but right now it's a labor of love.
How did looking back at your path, how does that influence the culture you're trying to create at the Bolden Group?
I think first and foremost, and you know this as well as I do because you feel it too. Being a Marine is one of my life's greatest moments at pride. I enjoy the Marine Corps. I enjoy a lot of things the Marine Corps represents. Nonetheless, the Marine Corps is a flawed organization. Just like any organization. And as good as we are, the things that we do, we can be better if we do different things. And I spent 26 years living in that system and watching it succeed in some areas and not do so well in others. And there was always a kind of a running theme to where we weren't doing as well as we could do. And it normally boiled back down to leadership and how leaders presented themselves to those being led, how they integrated those that they were there, whose charge they were given, their safety and well-being, how they did it, and who they looked to for that performance that the Marine Corps required. And it tended to fall back into a lot of the very same demographics. And in most cases, it wasn't a conscious decision or a conscious effort, it was more systemic in nature. And now that I am retired with a beard and I can call my own shots, I am taking the lessons learned from being in one of the highest performing organizations in the history of humankind and taking those areas where it could improve and applying those against those areas that I think are emerging that can learn those lessons so we don't have to make the same mistakes twice. Again, it all boils back down to leadership. It's either good leadership and good team building or it's not.
No, that's great. It's interesting, this whole discussion, we're focusing a lot on leadership, not only at the individual level, but the organizational level and really at the national level as well. And again, when we look at the space industry, space domain, you've got civil space, commercial space, national security space, that all of those interests have to be aligned. Mm-hmm. What's your view on the alignment of those interests and who needs to lead that? Does it need to be the government that takes the lead? Is it the commercial sector that takes the lead? Or does it need to be more of a consortium approach?
Mm-hmm. Until about the last decade, it was all about national security. Space was a national security interest. And when the rest of the world looks at space right now, they typically look at it through a national security lens. I had the good fortune of going to a conference a couple of months ago in Nairobi, Kenya, Space in Africa. It was the first one of its kind. Of the 55, or 4, depending if you're from the State Department or not, African nations, 22 of them were represented there. 11 of their heads of agency were there. Almost all of them looked at space through the defense lens. To me, my personal opinion, that's a mistake because that got us to where we are. It advanced space in such a way that it's now accessible, but we are now at an inflection point where space is more of a commercial or private sector endeavor. Obviously, being from America and being an American, I do believe in capitalism, and the way almost all of the massive explosions in industry have happened throughout our history has been because the capitalist model has allowed for growth. If there's a need for something, people come in and they fill that need. If there's not a need, it goes away. When you look at the way that space has developed, that national leadership based on national security was one way to go. The inflection point that we've since hit means that it's now time for capitalism to step in, and the private sector is really where a lot of the leadership's going to come. Now, that being the case, there is a very large space company out there right now that everybody believes that the leader of that space company has been the sole driving reason for their success. That space company has been heavily underwritten by the United States government. NASA has had a huge role in the success of that company. So no one should be fooled that because you get a very strong-willed, charismatic individual at the head of a private organization, that they're the ones that are pushing all of this innovation. The reality of it is they have been enabled by the United States government. And so the government will continue to have a role to play. And I will echo something my father has said is, the government should be there to take care of the really hard and nasty problems that we don't want to put, our citizens and our capital at risk without doing all of the risk assessment and whatnot. And that's what NASA is. NASA is a risk mitigation tool. Their processes are not compatible with the commercial market. That's for a reason, though, and it needs to continue. We would not have had the DART mission had that been led by private industry. It just wouldn't have. The return on investment isn't fast enough. The United States government has the patience and the will to do things like that over time. Going to Mars is in all likelihood going to be a heavily government-funded mission because it is a long process and very expensive. The two things about space that people have to continue to understand is it's very, very expensive and it's very, very hard. Very hard. The United States has been in the lead because we do hard things, and we will continue to do hard things. Now it's time for U.S. industry to do that hard thing alongside of the government, but at the same time, there's a lot of talent in other places besides U.S. private industry that we need to reach into, and we need to enable, and we need to make them part of the solution.
In the limited time that we have left, let's talk a little bit of return on investment and hard finance. I know you were involved in advising on a merger or really a company going public earlier this year. It ended up not happening due to some of the economics of it and changing market conditions. But moving forward, do you see a lot more of private finance coming in and supporting the not only development of the space industry but the consolidation of it as well?
The development, yes. The consolidation, I hope not. The auto industry is probably a pretty decent analog for where space could go. We have finite numbers of automakers, but the market's not closed off to new automakers. It's just the barrier to entry is kind of high. You get Rivian being a great example. More people are learning about Rivian. They're coming into the electric vehicle market, but they have the ability to do it because our market allows for it. There's no roadblocks to their entry. So when we talk about space, I think people should maintain this idea that it is an open economy. It is there for anybody and there for the taking. When it comes to, I do want to caveat, we're actually not a mergers and acquisitions. We don't have any economics folks or any mergers and acquisition people. We just got brought in. We were brought in as advisors because space was at the heart of that acquisition. I think there is a fear of the special purpose acquisition company now as a result of what's happened in this past year. I hope it passes because it is a viable tool to grow an industry. The challenge that we have right now, and the company that we were partnered with, or we targeted, actually defied the norm right now, is they were a very solid, well-founded company. They had a pipeline. They had proven missions. So their decision not to go public via the SPAC was not a result of any uncertainty around the market. They will succeed. Just the economics of it didn't make sense. But when you look at that going forward, I am not a very big fan of the venture capital model and therefore the SPAC model as it's currently implemented because it's looking for a high rate of return really, really quickly. As I said earlier, space is not the place for that, at least not yet. Until we can get the cost of launch down to a manageable figure, you're not going to find companies that are going to explode and all of a sudden become these multi-million-dollar companies. Not without a lot of capital invested into them and a lot of patience and a lot of help. What we believe as a company is that we need to bring together people who understand the challenge and can help identify those companies that have the longevity and the skill sets to contribute to the space economy. And so the manifestation of that for us is we've created an ecosystem that we call InterAstra, and it's intended to be the global public square for space. For those economically minded individuals, if you remember IMS from the early 80s that became Bloomberg LP, Bloomberg is now the place where everybody goes for financial advice. We want to be the same thing down the road. It'll take us some time to get there, but back to your question much earlier, the competitive advantage, I'd be hard pressed to find a company that has the expertise behind it that we have. There are those out there that have gone and found onesies and twosies, but generally speaking, we're pretty deep. And so we think that InterAstra has got a solid foundation of expertise to build on, but our expertise is not what's most important. The institutional expertise is not what's most important. It's the new and emerging expertise that people have yet to tap into, and that's really, when you talk about the concept of mergers and acquisitions, what middle tier companies should look for is those new and emerging companies that have something that's just mind-blowingly different. Take a chance. Invest in what they're doing because your return on investment on that, while it may not be 3 to 5 years or even 1 year like some people want, it will come, and it will come in spades, because it's going to be a very lucrative place to be. But we've got to look across the entire spacescape to see where those opportunities are, and not strictly in those traditional areas of launch, satellites, human spaceflight, multiplanetary exploration. Let the institutions do that. NASA, ESA, JAXA, Roscosmos. That's what they're there for. And they're supported by a huge industrial complex. They will take care of that. They're the ones that are going to help us bring the cost of launch down to a certain point, but it's going to take innovation from the small private sector to actually push us over, over that hump, hit that inflection point, so things really do start coming down.
Well, while space is vast and infinite, our time today is not. So I certainly want to thank you for joining us. Really enjoyed the discussion.
Rich, it has been an absolute pleasure, especially since it's with you, one of my oldest and longest friends, and so thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'd like to thank today's guest, Che Bolden, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Charles F. Bolden Group, for his insights into the Bolden Group's strategy and business model that seeks to help both government and private sector leaders create value in the space domain for security, the economy, and society. Please join us on October 27th for ASMC's third annual Data Analytics and Decision Support Virtual Conference, where we will discuss leveraging technology for PPBE reform. Registration is open on the ASMC website. You won't want to miss it. And watch the Business of Defense again next month, where we bring you inside the companies working to drive transformation in the defense sector, to hear directly from their business leaders and to understand how they create value for their companies and their customers. I am Rich Brady, CEO of the American Society of Military Comptrollers, and thank you again for joining us. You are listening to Federal News Network. For more information on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search ASMC.